supper afterwards this morning, and so I'm going to go ahead and just jump right into where we are as we're moving. We're going to be in Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. Now, you may notice that there's a weird logo here, and this is actually our introduction to that today. That's the logo that we're going to be using for Concord. Here's what it means as you look at that. You can see the word Concord here with the white C, and then the larger C is representative of Christ. And the concept of this is that we are Concord in Christ. We are about being wrapped up in Him. And so we're really excited about that. But even as you think about that, that's kind of a cool picture, but you ought to see the gym floor. It's on the gym floor and it looks awesome. So cool. So you may want to go and see that as well today. So we're moving into Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. We're also in a different moment today as far as moving into the word lead, moving into the concept of lead. Now, if you've not been here with us, you may not understand all that's going on with these 8 core values that are up there, but I'm asking us to imagine that each one of those 8 core values is like a slat. And in those slats, if the barrel was to be made up of these 8 core values, then we would hold as much water as we were strong in those slats. So for instance, the first one we looked at was prayer. The next one we looked at was purpose. We just got done looking at the idea of how are we to serve like Christ calls us to serve. We're coming into these ideas of lead. And if you were just to imagine that you were operating at your full capacity for the word lead, then you would be able to be all the way up on that slat. But if you were operating at 20% of your capabilities or of God's intentions for you, then you would be down here. And so when we look at these ideas of the slats and those slats making up the barrel, the reality is the barrel is only going to hold as much as our weakest slat. So when we look at leadership, and as we're going into this idea today, some people look in their own lives and think, but I'm not really a leader. But here's what I want you to understand, is all of us are leaders. Leadership is taking responsibility for the expectation that God has for you. Now, you may not be a leader where you're influencing a whole lot of other people, but you are certainly responsible for the life that you have. And so I'm asking you, even if you don't have a massive influence over other people, what if instead you just took responsibility for what God has called you to do in your own life and live that out? What I've found is as we take responsibility for our actions and take responsibility, then God gives us more responsibility, and in doing that, gives us more influence as we go. And so we're jumping into this idea of lead, and I want us to look to the Word to see what does it have for us today. Like I said, we're in Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village. So Jesus had been talking to them. This is right in line with what we've been preaching over the last few weeks. So as they were going their way, they entered this village. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. What's happening here? They're going along. I've told you, we know for sure that there were 12 that were with him, but there's a high likelihood that there were about 150 who followed Jesus consistently. Either way, there is a contingent of people that are walking down the road. This lady recognizes who he is and says, "Come into my house." I want you to imagine what that would be like. Somebody in your home is probably the one who's a little bit more gregarious, the one who reaches out, and somebody else in your home is probably the one who takes responsibility for a lot of what happens there. And so all of a sudden, the more gregarious one comes up and is like, "Hey, why don't you come have a party with us?" And the one who's actually pulling it off is panicking. Does that register to anybody or any homes here? Like all of a sudden, like, how are we going to take care of this? How are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure that everything's taken care of? Well, what's happened is Martha has said, hey, why don't y'all come in? We're going to take care of you all for a little while. Now, when we look at what's happening here, I want you all to think in your life, what gifts do you have? How has God uniquely gifted you and equipped you to be somebody who impacts the world? What are the things that he made you uniquely to do? I've heard that the number 2 fear amongst humanity is public speaking. I can't imagine that. Right? Whenever I was a youth pastor, when I was a young youth pastor, I would expect everyone to go and share, like, let's go out on the street corners and share what God has done. I had no idea that God hadn't equipped everyone the same way that he had equipped me. So, when we look at what's going on with Martha, I believe Martha has this gift as a hostess. So what I want to encourage you all to do is find your gift and use it. There's tests that we have. There's people within the church that will help you find that. Chris is sitting right here. He would love to help you with that. He's even waving. That's how excited he is. To wave in a Baptist church is it's a big deal, right? So he's over there waving, look at, raise the roof. So when we talk about that, he could help you find your gifts if you're interested in finding that. There's tests that can be given. But the reality is most of you probably are pretty familiar. The trick is, when we have gifts, sometimes we mistake them as skills. I want you to understand that there are skills that you have that you can hone, that you can be better at, that you can work towards. And sometimes those skills look just like a gift. And what I want you to understand, the difference is a gift, you didn't work for it. You don't understand the difficulty that it took to get there. And so you probably take it for granted if you're not careful. So, if you have this gift, you may not realize that's not as easy for everybody else. And so Martha comes in the world and she's like, hey, let's have a party. Now look what happens here. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Wow, that's awesome. How many of you would love to do that? Like, let's just say we had an afternoon and we could either sit at John's feet and listen to him teach, or sit at Jesus's feet and listen to him teach. Even I would choose that, right? Like, let's go in that direction. Let's go and just sit and soak up the teaching of Jesus. Like, that would be a dream come true. And that's what Mary is doing. She's like, you know what? I'm going to go and sit and I'm going to listen to Jesus, and I'm going to hear his tone, and I'm going to hear his delivery, and I'm going to hear what makes the mark for him to spend time in investing in. I'm going to go and do that, right? I'm going to go and listen to his teachings. And so when we look at these ideas, what I want you to see is that there's different things that people with different gifts do. For instance, if you are a gifted teacher, oftentimes you are also a gifted researcher, right? If God has gifted you to be a teacher, then he also makes you want to know the information. He makes you want to be able to share that in a way that makes sense to people, right? And so if you're doing that, then that really matters to you. Now, if you're a gifted hostess, you may not care about all those details. In fact, they may just get in the way of us doing something. And so what I want you to sense here is that here you have one who is a hostess and she's doing something, and here you have someone else who has different gifts, and the one who wants to be hosting is mad that this one isn't doing what she wants her to do. Like, have you ever heard of anyone getting in trouble for sitting at the Lord's feet and listening to his teaching? That's ludicrous. Nobody thinks like that unless they're in the middle of doing their own gifting and it offends them. So what we need to do is know how to use our gifts. We also need to not assume that everyone has your gifts. This is critical. There's a lot of tension that happens within the body of Christ because certain people have gifts and get offended when other people don't operate in their gifts. For instance, there are people who have the gift of prophecy. Now, when I say gift of prophecy, I'm not talking like foretelling the future. Instead, I'm talking about forthtelling the truth. Black and white, this is truth, this is what it should be. There's people who have that gift. Generally, they're not very popular, right? Because it's a lot for people. Like when you have somebody who has a gift of prophecy and tells you exactly what is right, exactly what is wrong, tells you how the cow ate the cabbage, like lays it out, then all of a sudden people who are not quite as gifted there, like push back from that just a little. It's like a little too much, right? A little scary. Then the person with that gift of prophecy sees someone else who's maybe serving and just wants to serve, and they're serving in such a way where as they serve, they're trying to win the lost. And so you have somebody who's got this great ability to have compassion on somebody, and then a truth teller comes and lays them bare. Then there's tension between these two, because here I was trying to love this person, and now you come and you're a jerk to them, and now we have a problem, right? These things happen within the church. To be honest with you, many churches are divided along these kind of lines. And it takes some wisdom for us to all step back and say, wait, I'm going to not presume that everybody has my gift and should operate like me. And I'm also going to presume that I don't have some of their gifts. And what that infers is that I need them. Right? Because in the church, we need black and white truth tellers. But those black and white truth tellers also need these people with compassion that can show them how to deliver that message in a way that is palatable for people. So what you have here is Martha, who has this gift of hosting, Mary, who has a completely different gift, and Martha is expecting her to operate according to her standards. So Martha, says, was distracted with much serving. Now, anybody who has the gift of hospitality, the gift of service, may get offended by that phrase, was distracted with much serving. Right? They're like, hold on, that's who I am. That's who I'm supposed to be. Right? What's wrong with you people? Don't you understand that y'all can't get along without us? Right? They have that idea, right? And she went up to him, Jesus, and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? From her perspective, this is a very understandable concern. Like, can't you see that, like here I've invited these people, we want to take care of you, and can't you see that my sister, who I was counting on to help with this, is not here? Like, she's not even helping. And she sees her as a total jerk. Like, I can't believe that she's not employed. And the Lord says to her, or she says, tell her then to help me. It's also interesting. That's very interesting to me. Anytime you need to tell God what to do, you may be out of line. Right? Tell her then to help me. So, I want to encourage you, use your gifts. Don't assume that everyone has your gift. Third, don't measure people according to your gifting. This right here is what I was talking about within church. Some of our frustrations and hurt towards people are that we're measuring them according to how we've been gifted. And we just can't imagine that they don't see it the way we do, because we have taken for granted the fact that the way we operate is based on what He's given us. I want you to consider that. I want you to consider that with some of the people that you don't get along with, even within our fellowship. I want you to consider that when you think of teachers that you have a hard time dealing with, or people that you've served alongside on committee. And sometimes it's really important that we don't assume that they are gifted the same way that we are, And not only that, but they may have gifts we don't have. And so we need to be able to relate to them well. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha. Now, I've read books about having a Mary heart in a Martha world and some of these ideas that are very influential. As I look at this idea right here, I just see him saying her name. And what I want us to understand is that God knows us individually. God knows us by name. God understands this. So as we're looking and we're learning how to use our gifts, as we're not assuming that other people have our gifts, as we're not measuring them according to our gifts, I want you also to understand that Jesus is intimate. He cares about every single person. So before we go and judge them for not having our gifting or not being a good human or whatever it is that we're tying them down with, what if instead we recognize that Jesus knows us all intimately? As your pastor, I desperately want to learn names, and I think I learn or know less names each week. I get more and more confused at the whole thing. Right? I want to know names so badly, and then you realize Jesus knows names specifically. He says, Martha, Martha. I wish we could hear the tone here, but I think it's compassionate. And look at what he says to her. You are troubled about many things. Like he looks right into where she is, right into the concerns that she has, right into the things that have her distracted, right into the anxiety, right into perhaps the frustration of her history, knowing how she and Mary have probably related their entire lives. He looks right into the middle of it and says, you are anxious and troubled about many things. So in the middle of his intimacy, look at this. Jesus cares about your concerns. Everyone coming here today has some concerns. We all have issues. We all have things that we're wrestling with. And I want you to hear today, even as I'm sharing this text, he cares about your concerns. He knows them. He knows right where you are. But look what he says. One thing is necessary. Read that all together. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Right? He's like, I understand all of your concerns, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to see something very specific right here. There's only one thing that's really necessary. I want you today to also understand point number 6 is this. Jesus knows what gives you peace. You're carrying this anxiety, these concerns. You're looking at other people and you're thinking, hold on, that's not the way it should be. You've got a certain amount of gifts that God has given you, that God has used to make you very unique. You're looking at other people and you're judging them according to these, and it's creating frustration. The world shouldn't be like this, and why is the world like this? And Jesus comes and says, listen, I know you've got all sorts of chaos, but there is one thing that is necessary. And I want you in your own hearts to apply this to your lives. Our little looking around at the world and seeing all the difficulties, are looking around at the world and seeing all of these anxieties, are looking around at the world and thinking everything isn't operating according to what you would have anticipated or what you would expect. And I want you to hear Jesus say, listen, you're anxious about a lot, but I want you to see one thing is necessary. I want you to get this. And I haven't hammered it a whole lot in my preaching and teaching, but I want you to understand that Jesus has given us a key here where he's saying, hey, come and get with me. Come and learn from me. come and hear my spirit? It says, Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Mary has chosen to come sit at my feet. I'm not going to take that away from her. Mary has chosen the one thing that gives peace. I'm not going to take that away from her. Mary has chosen the one thing that leads away from anxiety and right into stability, and I'm not going to take that away from her. Mary has chosen this beautiful moment, and rather than distracting her with all of the chaos that obviously is consuming you, I'm going to let her stay right here in fellowship with me. I want you all to see that Jesus knows exactly what gives us peace. And I also want you to see that Jesus defends his people. And so as we're analyzing these truths today, and as we're looking at what happens today, and as we're looking at leadership today, I want you to, in your own mind, think through what leadership is. And it's us taking responsibility for what God has called us to do. It may be today that you don't have a huge responsibility for a whole lot of people, but you are responsible for how you respond to him. You may just be responsible as a married couple to taking care of the other and making sure that the other is strong and growing and working together. It may be that God has gifted you with children and your job is to make sure that they're being raised up. And if you're allowing the chaos of this world to consume you, then you are missing out on the one thing that is necessary. It may be that in your job it's become that you have several employees that respond to you and interact with you, and I want you to hear there is one thing that is necessary. One thing that they need to see in you. One thing that they need to hear from you, and that is the very presence of Christ, that is his peace, that is his joy, that is his compassion that reigns in you. And so as we look at this idea of leadership, what I want us to all understand as we look at it, it's not about us overpowering somebody else or us being able to assume massive amounts of influence or us seeing how many likes we can get on social media or any of those kind of things. It's all about, am I using the influence that God has given me to fulfill the responsibilities that he's called me to? Because we've got a lot of people out there that have lots of likes or lots of followers that are not good leaders. We've got people who have been elected into positions that are not taking their responsibilities clearly. What I want us to understand in this room, in this setting, is we're not responsible for all of them. We're responsible for me. I'm responsible for me. And I'm responsible for those that God has given me the influence over. And I want each one of us in this room to quit judging everybody else according to all of these other things. So we're to use our gifts. We're not to assume that everyone has our gifts. We're to quit measuring people according to our gifting. We need to recognize that Jesus is intimate, not only with everyone, but with me specifically. And then taking that to be more specific, even your enemies. We need to recognize that Jesus cares about your concerns, that he knows what gives genuine peace, and that he defends his people. So as you're there today and we're launching into this first sermon of leadership, I want us to recognize what is it that God's called me to do uniquely. It's interesting because as I come to know Concord, it's amazing to me. I come into groups of people and I'm just shocked at how wonderful they are. And I think that must be the core of this church. And then I meet another group of people and I'm shocked at how wonderful they are. And that must be the core. And everywhere I look, there's more and more wonderful people committed to the Lord, capable on multiple levels. And in my heart of hearts, I just hear the Lord pointing out, John, I have so much potential in my people. What I want Concord to do is not wring her hands worrying about the state of the world. What I want Concord to do is each one of us take responsibility for what God has called us to do. And as we begin to pull in the same direction, I want you to know I believe that the response will be miraculous. God changed the world with 12. And you all are many more than 12. And I believe that God wants to do things. What we need to quit doing is worrying about all of the chaos and start trusting that God has a unique call on me. And as I link up with other people, that he's going to use us for his glory. And that makes me pretty excited. Will you pray with me? God, today,